Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. This is my favorite part of our webinar series where everybody's virtually coming and taking a seat, and I'm standing here all by myself in a room pretending like I can see an audience filling in. Welcome to the pandemic. Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Stojkovic. I am the Executive Director of sf.citi. And welcome to today's final event in the COVID-19 Effect series that we've been doing here at sf.citi. We saved one of the best topics for last because we're going to be talking about, drumroll, education. This is going to be quite a topic. What does the future of education look like? What does it look like in the face of the pandemic? Are the kids going back to school? When are the kids going back to school? I think we heard today on the news that the second largest teachers union in America said that they are authorizing their teachers to not go back to the classroom no matter what the president is saying. So it's going to be a very strange time come this fall. And it is July 29th, which means it's almost August. So it is back to school season. Very timely topic. We are very lucky to have San Francisco Board of Education President Mark Sanchez. Mark has done it all. He is a teacher, he's been a principal, he is part of the school board, and he is the perfect person to be having today's conversation about what it's going to look like for education in San Francisco and California in the coming months. Before we get to our awesome conversation with Mark, I have a few housekeeping notes for you. That's my job, gotta go through these. So first and foremost, you guys see that little Q&A down there? Look right down there to Q&A. We are going to be taking questions today. We want you to submit your questions, your thoughts, your concerns. Perhaps you're trying to figure out how to get your employees back in the office or how to manage them with a whole bunch of kids at home while also trying to be productive with their work. Perhaps you're an educator yourself and you are wondering how you are going to be teaching all of these kids online. We are going to get to as many questions as we possibly can. So throughout today's conversation, just stick them down there in the Q&A box. They're going to pile up. I get a notification when you submit them, and we will get to as many as possible. Thank you in advance to everybody for helping us with the Q&A, and thanks to everybody who submitted their questions ahead of time when they registered. Next, this webinar is recorded. Great. So if you are not able to join us live and spend your lunch with us, that's okay, because we are going to be sending this out afterwards. So every single thing that you hear today is going to be recorded, and then you will be able to share it and rewatch it as much as possible. Lastly, you've got to share your thoughts on social media. We'd love to hear what you're thinking. So if you have any thoughts about today's conversation, you'll see Jackie from our team just tagged you right there in the chat. So use the hashtag #TheCovid19 Effect and tag sf.citi on Twitter. Okay, so before we get to this big conversation today, we're going to do a quick primer on where we are at with the education system today. So I'm going to pull up our slide deck real quick and just do a quick once over with everybody so that we're all on the same page. Okay. So just to get quickly started, who is sf.citi? So we are the Tech Trade Association for San Francisco. We were founded back in 2012 to empower the San Francisco tech community to have a voice in tech policy decisions and collaborate with government and community leaders. That means conversations like today, where we can talk about bringing the tech companies together with our educators, is very important and a big piece of what we do. Real quick, I'm just going to plug, we do a COVID-19 update every single Monday. So if you want to be finding out what's going on in the San Francisco tech community, please go to sfciti.org and you can go to the SF Tech COVID-19 update. We'll also be emailing it every Monday morning at 10 a.m. sharp. Okay, so here's the TLDR. So, with the start of the school year fast approaching and COVID-19 cases quickly rising, Plans to reopen schools in San Francisco and California are complicated. Yeah, I would say that that's a bit of an understatement. With a federal directive from the Trump administration to reopen schools, the response throughout the country has varied from state to state. Even as the president threatened to cut off federal funding to school districts that do not comply with his orders, many school districts have decided to not reopen. On July 17th, Governor Newsom made California the first state to officially bar students returning to the classroom for the start of the 2020 to 2021 academic year. The state's official pandemic plan for schools, both public and private, requires that a school's county must be off of California's monitoring list for 14 consecutive days before becoming eligible to reopen physically. At the time of the announcement, the state's monitoring list had 30 of the 58 California counties, including pretty much all of the Bay Area, and made up more than 80% of the state population. Reopening schools is an immensely difficult decision to make, especially as we still don't know everything we need to know about the virus. But with each passing day, scientists are gathering more data. Recently, health experts have started pointing to emerging research that suggests children are less likely to contract COVID-19, are at an overall lower risk if they do contract COVID-19, and are less likely to transmit the virus to adults. But those findings have unfortunately been tested out in recent weeks, from outbreaks in childcare facilities to nearly 1/3 of all of Florida's cases in children younger than 18, and many more stories. Children are not as resistant from COVID-19 as we had once believed. The risk of going back to the classroom is especially dangerous for teachers. In the United States, more than 1/4 of public school teachers are over the age of 50, and almost 1.5 million teachers have a condition that makes them more susceptible to COVID-19. Teachers and other school staff want to serve their students as best they can, but they do not want to sacrifice themselves or risk the health of their family and loved ones. In Los Angeles, the United Teachers of Los Angeles reported that 83% of their 18,000 members polled said schools should not reopen in August. As schools begin to reopen, many education officials fear a wave of early retirement, resignation, and leave requests driven by the health concerns. This does not bode well for an education system already facing a teacher shortage. In a decision to maximize safety, Governor Newsom plans to introduce a set of guidelines that schools must adhere to in order to send students back to the classroom. This includes mandatory mask requirements for staff and third graders and above, suggested masks, of course, for second grade and below, physical distancing protocols in the classroom, robust sanitization standards, regular testing of school staff, and dedicated contact tracing for all school staff. The plan also puts in place a guideline for schools and school districts to follow in case staff or students test positive that would attempt to quarantine and shut down schools before the virus can spread further in the community. But as of now, most schools will be going distance learning for quite a while. The governor made it clear that schools must provide meaningful instruction even if it's online. I can't wait to talk about that one because I know there's a lot of opinions on that. While teachers and students were able to get a distance of learning at the end of 2019 to 2020, it was considered pretty much a failure across the board. Many of the issues of distance learning can be attributed to the digital divide, where the lack of access to technology not only creates an unequal playing field, but it makes education completely out of reach for many children based purely on their family's income. As of mid-June, the California Department of Education estimates that schools reported needing, 416,000 hotspots and 765,000 devices. California's plan acknowledges the struggles caused by this divide and mandates that all students must have access to devices and connectivity for the upcoming school year. To help school districts reach this goal, the state made funding available to assist with purchasing tech supplies. Schools have also heavily been supported by the philanthropic and business communities that stepped up and are working to bridge the gap. In San Francisco alone, Sfusd distributed more than 12,000 Chromebooks, and the city provided 3,500 personal hotspot devices, deployed 25 Wi-Fi superspots, and connected more than 1,300 public housing units to the internet. Even with these donations, however, San Francisco and California still have a long way to go. When schools eventually reopen, some California schools will elect to gradually bring students back and employ a hybrid model of learning that combines in-person and online. This is not going to be an easy journey for students, educators, and parents alike. But in order to return to some sense of normalcy and get students back in the classroom and learning, it is clear that our leaders must take the necessary precautions when reopening schools. Wow. Okay. So that's a doozy, guys. That is quite a bit of information that we just dumped on you. So before we bring up Mark, we are going to do a quick poll of the room. All right, everyone, you'll see that the poll is launched. We want to hear from you. When would you feel safe to send your child or children back to school? All right, while the poll is in effect, President of the San Francisco Board of Education, Mark Sanchez, let's welcome you up. Hello, hello.
It's good to see you all. Thanks for having me.
How's it going?
That's the question of the day, right? How are people doing?
I know.
It's almost invasive now.
Right? We need like a new way for us to like start a conversation, right? You're used to like, how are you? Hope you had a nice weekend. We need something that brings a little bit more levity to the conversation.
Isn't the weather nice?
Yeah, exactly. So the sun is shining. We still have a sun.
Yeah, some acronym we'll have to do. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's, you curious about the poll? I'm pretty curious about the poll.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see where everybody is at. Okay, we're ending the poll and let's share the results. Okay, so unsurprisingly, almost 60% of folks don't have kids. That is just such a quintessentially like San Francisco thing to happen. We do a poll on being a parent and there's no parents in the room. That's funny. All right, so it seems like for those that do have kids, only when schools have met all of California's required safety guidelines. And we did have one person that says right now, and that is the person that might need the Zoom therapy that we were talking about. Parents are, it's pretty crazy what's going on with everybody at home. All right, yeah. So Mark,
yes.
let's get started. So how have things been? I feel like that's the easiest way to start the conversation. How have the last few months as an educator been for you?
Well, I have, as you know, two jobs. I'm a fourth grade teacher in Daly City, and I'm the president of the Board of Education. Both of those things are linked, of course. I do not have children, so I do not have that experience of being home with my children, trying to teach, which I have colleagues that do that. Trying to navigate the pandemic has been incredibly difficult, as you can imagine, trying to make policies in real time. For example, opening schools, are we distancing? Are we hybriding? Are we going back fully? Now we have more guidelines. Obviously, you went over them from the governor. Thankfully, he released those on July 17th. So we have pretty much, we know our kind of marching orders for the beginning of the year, because San Francisco is a county that is under orders to be not opening our schools. However, if we meet the guidelines to reopen, which is 14 days of lowering cases and some other indicators, we will then be in somewhat of a planning mode to venture into hybrid learning and teaching. And that will entail, obviously, a memorandum of understanding with our teachers union. We are in the middle of our MOU process for the distance learning part right now. We should be finished by the end of the middle of next week with that. And then we'll embark upon the next MOU for hybrid. So you had mentioned Randy Weingarten, who's the president of the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, giving authorization for teachers to go on strike if schools are forced to open, which I totally agree with. And I think that would happen clearly in San Francisco as well, if there was some type of order to mandate it to open without all the safety guidelines in place. So there's a lot to reckon with, and to be really honest, it's been anxiety provoking and I'm very frustrated, but my frustration was really aimed at the White House. My anxiety and anger are there too, as well as with the virus itself. And I think that people need to have a sense of compassion and grace and flexibility as we move forward, because we do not know all the answers, and we will make mistakes as we did in the distance learning phase that started in the spring. We will make corrections as we go along, but this is going to be a really difficult process because everybody knows who has children that you cannot replace in school, in person teaching with a distance mode for little ones. You just can't. It's not feasible. So these are huge barriers, and there's not going to be great answers for all the questions that are coming our way.
Yeah. Just a reminder to everybody, if you want to be submitting questions throughout Mark and I's conversation, please throw them in the Q&A below. So I guess the easiest way to kind of bridge the conversation is, so what is the plan for SFUSD for the year right now? What is known so far?
What we know is that we are going to start on August 17th, distance learning and teaching. That the guidelines from the state through SB 98 and the Assembly Bill 77, which are identical, mandate the amount of minutes and hours a day that students must be engaged, either synchronously or asynchronously with their teachers. So synchronously is, me on Zoom with my children, and asynchronously is with assignments that I assign through Google Classroom and then collect later and go over with them later. That's part of our MOU process, is to delineate the time of each with each grade level. And once we have that nailed down, our teachers will have their marching orders, our parents will know what's happening. We've also issued distance guidelines around teaching and learning in general in the spring, and we bolstered them. So those are going to be public facing really soon. The teachers already have them, or principals already have them. They started on Monday. So that's what it's going to start off with. Like I said earlier, once it is safe to go back into the classroom, it will be a hybrid model where some students will be going in and many will not at the beginning. We'll focus on our focal students, which are students that we know have struggled even before distance learning happened. And in San Francisco, that's our African-American students, our special education, special needs students, our English learners, and a couple other populations of students that we will prioritize going back first. Then we'll ramp up and have as many students as possible. And we want to leave the option for families who do not want to go back at all. But we'll have most of our kids go back in a hybrid model where they'll spend, there's different models, but like an AB, Monday, Tuesday for one group, and then Thursday, Friday for the other group, and Wednesday is a Zoom day for everybody, for example. There's many different scenarios, but basically every child will be offered the opportunity to come back part of the week in the classroom, because it would have to be a staggered schedule, because unless there's a vaccine at that time and that's been administered and is successful, we're not going to be able to have all of our students in our classrooms because we don't have the space to distance them and to have and follow all the protocols for safety and disinfecting our classrooms. So in general, that's what it's going to look like, and I imagine that's how it's going to look in most districts in California. But like everybody is saying, it could change radically really soon. One thing I would say, people have been asking, like, what do you think of the governor's stance in general, or, his decisions in general? I think he's been doing really well. But I would say this: if he had decided to do a lockdown a la March, the last 2 weeks, where everybody has to stay inside and you're quarantined, essentially quarantined, even more strict than March actually, we would be able to have more assurances of being able to open up many of our schools, because the rate of infection would be going down dramatically. Now that's a balancing act with politics, economy, and health. But that's my view, is that we could be doing a lot better in terms of our decision making at the state level, so that we could have a much safer opening for our kids.
Yeah, I think a complete and total shutdown, like some of our other counterparts did, seems like, it could have quashed it a lot faster. So with that being said, are there any other countries that you are looking at that have kind of done this successfully, or perhaps on the flip side, flopped it entirely, and we want to avoid those mistakes?
Well, I'll start with the flip. The one that stands out is Israel. Several months ago, they originally wanted to open up just their pre-K through, I think, first or second grade, which at the time and even now sounds okay. All the evidence is in right now about, you mentioned in the opening around spread by younger kids. The jury's still out, but many there's anecdotal and also some evidence showing that there's less spread with little ones. But instead, Israel opened all up, K through 12, at one time. And what they found really quickly is that their middle school students would not distance themselves. And that's where the spread started. The middle school students started to spread and bring it home,
Yep.
right from there. And then they just locked it down. And now they're kind of back at square one. And there's a lot of internal fighting in the government right now about that action and how to reopen again. The Scandinavian countries had been able to, except for Sweden, really flatten the curve really quickly. And it seems like their schools have been able to open with very little dire effect. And that's why I brought up, just shutting us down and getting down to a
Yep.
flattened rate, because then we would have much more ability to open up, a la what's happening in most of Scandinavia. We have not been able to do that, and that's because of really poor leadership from the top in the White House. So I would point to those countries. I know that other countries, if they do try to open, like Brazil, Brazil has the second highest rate and deaths in the country, in the world. And if they open up schools, which I'm sure they're going to try to do, because their
Yep.
president is crazy,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to find themselves in a deeper world of mayhem. So
Yeah.
that's what I would say in terms of what's happening in the world, and lessons that we can draw here, at least in California and in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm. How have the educators, let's start with them, I think, how did they feel about the last few months? Obviously, it was a little bit of a cluster, and it was thrown together really quickly, and just like all of our companies had to go remote overnight, getting all of the students remote overnight is just totally wild. How do you think the months went? What have you heard?
Starting in March, like we had, by mid-March, made the decision in San Francisco to shut down our schools. And we were thinking till May, and then of course we had to prolong it, as it did the whole state
Yeah.
and the country and the world. And immediately we on the dime had to go from in-class teaching and learning to distance learning. And it was really, and so speaking for myself, not having any of that background in terms of utilizing that type of platform or modality for teaching, it was really, really difficult. And I would say my class are generally better off in terms of the background of the parents of education and finances than most kids in San Francisco in public schools. And I would say that my students in distance learning, or we call it crisis learning sometimes, was that they maybe got 20 to 25% of what they would have gotten in the classroom with me in person. So
Wow.
if you can extrapolate from that to what a poor African-American or Latinx student in San Francisco was getting, it's much less, and they had much less of an advantage going into it. So we know that for well-off parents who have privilege and finances and education, that it was really horrible
Resources.
for them. We definitely know that the kids who've already struggled in brick and mortar structures, that it was even worse. And so, and as far as teachers go, as a whole, they're mortified because most 99% really love their job and really want to go back into that job in the classroom, going back to regular, like everybody. But as you said in the beginning, we have a lot of folks who are older, more than 55 years old, who have health issues as well, and they're just not in the position to go back. They just physically know that something could happen to them, and they're just not willing to sacrifice themselves or their families and loved ones, like you said in the opening. So that's where
Yep.
that's kind of the general zeitgeist of the educators. And most of my friends are educators, so that's what I'm hearing constantly from them as well. And many of my friends are principals too, and they're trying to navigate how do we ensure that everybody who's an educator in their school does have the tools so that they can perform distance teaching at the highest level possible, notwithstanding the fact that we all know that it's never going to mirror what's happening or could happen back in the classroom.
So I have a question in terms of, you said the older teachers, there's a couple things, right? They probably are less familiar with the technology, in addition to having these compounding factors of more likely to have comorbidities, and they're probably just under so much anxiety going back in the classroom. are some of the younger teachers, are they learning in teachers college and in universities and things like that? Are they learning anything about how to become distance educators? Like, was that in the plan at all?
Not that I've heard at all. And, San Francisco Unified School District is really privileged and lucky. We started 4 years ago our own credentialing program. So now you can go through a teacher pathway. About 80 prospective teachers enter every year, 80 to 100. And of course, this summer, it was teaching them how to do distance teaching. So yeah,
Oh,
we are
no.
now embarking upon that. So this cohort of folks going into the virtual classroom in August, late August, mid-August, are going to be better prepared than the normal average San Francisco Unified School District teacher. Although our district did a great job of putting out webinars for weeks on end that are archived and cataloged and that anybody can access, even parents, that showed them how to use Zoom, Screencastify, Seesaw, all Clever, all these things that are out there, almost too many things and platforms that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
Overwhelming, I think, for a lot of people, but there's opportunity. There has been opportunity for teachers that are older and have not had that technological background to access it. Now, whether they do is a different question. But moving into this next year, they're going to have to, because those are the PDs, the professional developments that are going to be mandated the 4 days prior to school starting, most likely, and then throughout the school year when there's professional development during every week, that'll be additional learning around this type of teaching.
It's so fascinating because, on this largest scale, we've never done this type of distance learning before. And I guess now is actually also the opportunity for there to be studies and be able to actually compare cohorts and probably understanding a lot of the science behind distance learning and in-person learning. I assume that that's in its infancy for the most part, at least in the US.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I hadn't thought about that in terms of what types of research is in the offing regarding distance learning vis-a-vis brick and mortar in-person learning. I would imagine still that maybe for the older students, like in high school particularly, you can get a lot more done. Although with labs, for example, you cannot, you can't have a chemistry lab in high school and make that quite as successful at home. However, there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from the homeschooling movement, I'm sure, over the years, and not that I'm promoting homeschooling or charter schools, but there has been a history of homeschools that have been chartered. And so perhaps there's online resources and learnings already from the kind of successes that have come about through that. Although when you think about homeschooling is a parental choice, it hasn't been thrust upon them, which is what's happening now.
Very different.
These are people that have embraced it from the beginning and want to do it, and they have their different political and religious and other reasons for doing so. But that being said, there's probably some best practices that we can glean from the decades of this going on.
And I feel like there's just a huge impending ed tech explosion that's going to happen out of this, right?
Yes.
Like there is just an entire new industry that's going to emerge out of this, because a lot of the tools that we have in place were designed for niche, people that chose homeschooling and things like that. But if we're going to have these mass populations that are on these tools, there's going to be a lot of money and a lot of innovation, I think, to come.
Yeah. And I think that Zoom, Zoom did not come about because of this. And Zoom now is actually, I think, has been modifying their platform to meet the needs of teachers and parents and kids, which has been really good. I always joke because that's what I used from the beginning is Zoom with my classroom. And I have 18 kids and they're very talkative and I can mute them all. And and that's just been really great because when I go back in the classroom, eventually I'm going to try to mute them and I won't be able to press a button. So,
oh no!
But no, there's some advantages, of course,
yeah,
to distance teaching, but very few.
Mark, you just took us to like a Black Mirror episode. I'm pretty sure trying to mute your children.
They're going to be when they get back in the classroom, they're going to be like, "Can I talk?"
So how do you? Okay. Side note: how do you put someone in suspension or detention virtually?
Well, what I have done, and I've learned from my friends who are teachers as well, is you open up extra rooms. So you have a lot of breakout rooms, and you just deposit a child. I mean, the worst case scenario is you have to remove them from the classroom totally and then talk to mom or dad. But in general, you can just place a kid or two in another room and give them a little
Oh my
timeout.
gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. There is a solution for everything,
Yeah.
right? And in every crisis, there's opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay,
I should
so
have visited him.
that's funny. So I think this is probably a good opportunity for us to kind of pivot to, so we have public, private, and charter schools in San Francisco, right? San Francisco, I believe, unless the statistic has changed, we have the highest rate of privatization of students in America, right?
Absolutely.
So how do these things differ for each of the types of schools?
Well, firstly, we've been duking it out with Honolulu and Seattle for years for the highest percentage of school-age kids in private schools. We also, San Francisco has historically had the lowest number or percentage or proportion of school-age kids of any metropolitan city or any
Yeah,
city. And there's many reasons for that, obviously. It's drawn a lot of young people who eventually, when they have kids, move out, and there's
yeah,
different reasons for that. Charter schools make up a small proportion of our students, 2,000 to 2,500. But
okay.
private schools is almost, depending on the numbers you look at, between 20 and 30% of all the kids in San Francisco go to private, and that's just amazing because the average for the nation is around 6 to 8. So it's and then as you can imagine, disproportionately those are white middle to upper middle class kids who are
Of
now
course.
then not in the public schools, depriving the public schools of that diversity, which we all should welcome. And then we have traditionally always had a really high, this has been traditionally, historically, a very Catholic city. So we have more than our fair share of Catholic schools. And so that those two together combine to really disadvantage, I think, the public school system, which is disproportionately poor kids of color.
Yeah. So do they have all of the same plans? I'm assuming they probably have more resources in their schools at least. Probably don't have the same hotspot need, but does it sound like everybody's generally fully virtual, and then when the city's numbers are dropping, they are going to go hybrid as well, or is somebody planning to go fully back in person?
The governor's order includes private and charter,
Yeah.
so they're in the same boat we are in. But you're right; they have more. Many, not all, have, like many of the Catholic schools are very old school, don't have a lot of money, not a huge money base or like a PTA base. But most of our private independent schools have a huge kind of a foundational wealth base, and they're able to do a lot more things in terms of having smaller class size, which even though it's distance learning, class size does matter. So you can individualize your teaching and you can have small breakouts. So they're able to do that. But they're going to suffer the same general malaise, I think, in general, because you cannot replicate what's happening in the classroom at all,
Yeah.
anywhere near. And maybe that'll change over time. I mean, if we're in this for a long time, it might not matter. But I think we'll get better and better as we do in any endeavor we try as Americans. You know, we grapple with things, we tackle them, and then we make them better. And that will happen if this is an extensive long-term proposition.
So one thing that I think is really fascinating about California is we have one of the shortest school years in terms of students actually in the classroom, right? And that is something that as North Americans, you know, I'm from Canada, but same thing, you know, we grew up with summers off and a lot of time off. That's one thing that is fairly unique to North America, is that, you know, we're off 2 days a week and we have very extensive holiday breaks. We're not in year-round schooling. Saturday schooling exists for millions or billions of children in the world. Would there be any sort of move towards changing what the actual school calendar looks like if the students take longer to comprehend this type of information?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Even predating this, I've been thinking a lot and talking to folks a lot about changing the school year calendar because it's based on the agrarian calendar, right? Everybody knows this, and it's ridiculous to have 2.5 months off. I mean, it's really nice to have 2.5 months off every summer, but it's not pedagogically okay. It's
No.
not developmentally okay. And in fact, there's a lot of what we call summer slide going on,
Yep.
where students actually lose a lot over the summer. And so we're not as competitive as a nation in many respects compared to other growing developing countries or countries that have already developed and are surpassing us in many indicators around education. In California, it's 180 days mandated by state law a year. So you could break it up any way you wanted. If you wanted to add days, of course, that would be a huge bargaining issue with the teachers unions, as well as, the administrators unions and everybody. I'm not against it. I'm actually for it. I think
Yep.
that kids should be going to school at least 200 days a year. At the very minimum, I think in Japan it's 220. So we have to rethink, and this is a good opportunity. It's giving us time actually to rethink a lot of how we do things, so that when we do return, we might be on the trajectory to have these things modified, at least in terms of, if not adding more days, because that's money, as you're indicating, because the state actually doesn't want to, has not wanted to fund public education, and it doesn't fund public education anywhere near the national average of per pupil spending. So adding even more money is a difficult proposition, but at least in terms of how you spread out the days and the hours. Colorado, for example, to attract teachers, because in some parts of Colorado it's really hard to attract and retain. Some of these smaller districts have gone to 4-day work weeks, which is really attractive for obviously for teachers and others that work in schools, and maybe not so attractive for families, but maybe for some families it is. So there's just different ways you could look at how you break down the school year, and I think this is a time to really tackle that one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I spent years at United Way, and summer learning loss was, your third grade reading level and summer learning loss, that was so much of what our work was targeting towards. So I think this is probably a good transition for us to talk about, what does that digital divide look like in San Francisco, and what still needs to be closed? What's the gap look like? And for anyone that is joining right now from tech, how could you see them being part of the solution?
I think that's the paramount question of the day, right? The digital divide obviously pre-existed lockdown, and our superintendent says this generally when he's asked about it, which is it took a pandemic to force us to reckon with the fact that so many of our students do not have access at home. And because of that lack of access at home, it provides an even bigger gap in the school. So when kids are trying to access tech at school, there's a gap between what some kids have already because they have foundational tech access at home and others don't. And so now we were put in that position, and I think we did a really great job of getting the vast majority of our students who needed devices and hotspots. And you referenced the numbers in the beginning. When you compare to other districts, it's much better than most districts. And as you also pointed out, the whole state of California, there's hundreds of thousands of devices and hotspots needed. And we're looking pretty good. We're ramping up to actually provide pre-K through second, because during the initial closure, it was 3rd through 12th that we gave devices to and hotspots. Now we're opening it up to all families. And we've raised $5 million, like a COVID fund since the beginning. That's kind of stalled over the last month or two. But we're definitely seeking more donations for that, to provide these tech devices and hotspots for every single one of our families that needs it. And also we have many, as you know, many of our families have more than one child. And if we're only giving them one device, that's not enough, because there's going to be times, obviously, every day where kids are going to need to be on the device at the same time. So there's a lot of our families who are going to need more than one device. And so, yeah, that's, when you talk about tech and giving or helping, I have to give a big shout out to Mark Benioff, who's given over $100 million to public schools in the Bay Area over the last 8 years. And I'm sure he will be giving in the future. And he's routinely made it his objective to plead and challenge other folks in the tech industry to step up, because a lot of them feel, I think, well, Mark's handling it. He's our tech guy. He's
our savior.
Yeah, he's the savior. He's doing SFUSD and Oakland Unified. So we don't really need to step in. And that's far from the truth. If we wanted in San Francisco, if we just wanted to get to the national average in per pupil spending adjusted for the cost of living in San Francisco, we'd need to add $200 million more a year. This is pre-COVID, $200 million more for San Francisco's kids just to get us to the national average, because San Francisco's cost of living is 60% higher than the national average. Sorry, 40% higher than the national average. So we have a long way to go. And I think tech, and just in general, 75 billionaires live in San Francisco. thousands of multimillionaires live in San Francisco. And in general, you could say pre-COVID really thrived. And in fact, many of the billionaires have actually done better during COVID because the tech industry has done better in many respects. And many of them are related to tech. So not to guilt trip them or not to browbeat them or not to diminish them at all. I just feel there's a good opportunity right now for people in a position to be able to give whatever they can toward the technology divide for San Francisco kids and families. But also we've served over 1 million meals since COVID started. And we're prepared to distribute even more, obviously, as we go into the new year. And that has been a big part of the donations that we've gotten has gone toward feeding even more than our own families that show up. We don't question them. And we've been giving meals to folks that are desperate in need of meals. So there's a lot that people can do, but in terms of actually technology expertise, that is, like folks that are in the tech industry who are not rich, who want to help and may have ideas for helping out, I'm all for that. And I think our district needs to form some kind of consortium that will bring together folks in the tech industry to brainstorm ideas and try to implement ideas that look promising so that we can get through this together, because there's so much expertise. And we talked about Zoom, but there's so much out there. There's so much more. I mean, there's Nearpod, which I'm going to learn next week. There's all kinds of things that are great. And I'll have to say this, kudos to the folks in tech who've either dropped their fees, for example, Epic Books, and others that said we're not going to, or Zoom itself. They basically waived fees for educators and for school districts. That has been huge, just absolutely huge for us. And I'm really grateful and appreciative for that. And like I said earlier, I think it'd be really wise of us to partner with you guys and see what ideas surface to really benefit all of our students.
Yep. Well, that's why we're doing the conversation today. So one last topic, and then I see our queue of questions is piling in, so we will get to those after this last question. But Mark, let's talk about pods. Let's talk about the mayor's pods, perhaps the Facebook mom pods that are emerging. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's going on there?
So there's multiple things happening at the same time. The mayor's pods are called community learning hubs, and there's going to be projected, I think, 40 of them throughout the city to serve 5,000 to 6,000 students, and they are actually being focused on the most needy of our students. And I mentioned who those focal students are at the beginning. So they're not necessarily going to be spread evenly throughout the city, because some areas of the city are much more needy. So, for example, the southeast sector of town, we know, has the hardest time with schooling and just in general living. The economics of their situation is extremely dire, around jobs, around home, about shelter, and then education, of course. So we know that those hubs will be, the mayor's projecting to start those by mid to late September. That will depend on a number of indicators around health and the guidelines from the health department. But if that gets off the ground, our district is more than prepared. And we've had initial discussions with DCYF, the Department of Children and Youth and their Families, which is the mover on this initiative, to get that going with them. I'm totally down for our school sites to be utilized in that, in the hub solution or partial solution. But again, that's going to be focusing on our focal students. In terms of pods per se, which has been kind of wildfire across the country, and primarily it looks like more middle to wealthier families who are looking at the idea or the notion of hiring, kind of like privatizing what's already happening for their kids in public schools, so that there's a teacher or a tutor who will take a small cohort of students and essentially teach them, whether it's using what the school is providing through distance teaching and supplementing it, or just leaving the public school system totally and going into a privatized pod, for example. There's so many variations. It's all driven from a good place, I feel. It's just that the unintended consequences will most probably be around furthering the divide between, the kids that struggle and the kids who have traditionally not struggled. One thing that I'll say that looks promising and I want to know more about is one of our schools, and it was mentioned in the board meeting last night, Rooftop. It was also mentioned in a New York Times article last week. Their school, it's a K-8 school in Twin Peaks, but it's a really diverse school, it draws from all over the city. And the parents have been working with the principal and teachers on this idea of forming cohorts, small cohorts that parents would actually guide. They wouldn't hire extra people, it would be all volunteer. They would go to where the kids are. So for example, a white parent and child may go to the Bayview to have a small cohort of 5 or 6 kids that will be very diverse. To me, that is an equitable solution, or partial solution to a very big problem around socialization, getting more from what's happening in distance learning and teaching. So I think it's promising if it goes along that trajectory. I'm very worried though about, like I said earlier, about the disparity that will be divide that will grow if and when, because it's going to happen. Families that are in public schools start to pull out and take their kids with them to hire a tutor or a teacher to do that work.
Yep. Okay, we got a queue of questions. Let's try to bang through them. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Rebecca, thanks for your question, Rebecca. Do you know if teachers and support staff will be able to get into school buildings even if children are not allowed? We need to have access to our materials. You might know Rebecca Bradley. It sounds like she was saying
Rebecca,
hi to you.
I was the principal at Cleveland Elementary and she was our librarian. Really well. Yes, hi Rebecca. So yes, like I said earlier, most of my friends are teachers and principals and they've all been asking me and beseeching me. And I've been working with our facilities department over the last week to try to grapple with this issue. There's so many moving parts in this. It's most likely not all sites will be open for teachers and principals and others to go into the schools, mainly because of the logistics around cleaning and sanitizing, which we already have custodians. Our custodians service way more than the industry standard in square footage. And so they're already overworked and overtaxed. And also some of them are just overwhelmed. And so to add to their job by having to do sanitizing in a very methodic and regular way with people in the school building at all our sites is most likely not going to happen. What probably will happen, which is not satisfactory for most people, will be that there will be in and of themselves school hubs that will be open for staff. So we're going to be surveying our staff, the teachers and paras and others, to see which ones of them want to go to a site to do their teaching. And I totally understand that. I want to do that. I teach from home. I want to be in my classroom. So I get it. I want that too. And it's not clear whether my school will be open for me to do that. But we will find out how many really want that and would commit to that to make a plan. So that's where it stands right now.
Okay. All right. Heather is wondering if do you have an estimate of the earliest that hybrid learning could happen in SF? And here's an interesting question. What about outdoor classrooms?
So to the first one, no, I do not have an answer because I know if I answer that, I will be wrong. There's just no way. The virus dictates what we do. And it goes back to what I said around just shutting everything down, because then we would have a better indicator of when we could open after 2 weeks. But so lacking that, I would not hazard a guess, although it's not looking good that we're going to go back anytime soon. And some districts have said they're not going to go back until the very earliest January. And there's a reason why some of those districts do that without even knowing for sure. It just gives a kind of a certainty. So I get why they might want to do that.
Planning.
Yeah, and then the other for outdoor, that outdoor is also going to be contingent on health orders. But once we're able to do it, it's very promising, I think, because as we know, we not only do we have the outdoors of our own schools in terms of the playgrounds, and the streets that surround the schools can be shut down for extra areas, and then we have many schools that abut public parks, and so we have rec centers and libraries and municipal buildings that have outdoors. So we do have plenty of outdoor space. and I'm totally for, utilizing them. We're already planning to utilize McLaren Park, which is the third largest park in the city, southeast part of the city. We're looking at opening that up to hundreds of students for daily learning activities. That's going to entail a lot of logistical planning, and implementation is going to be rough, but we have a lot of smart folks, and I think we can do it. So outdoor spaces, I think eventually might be part of the solution. It will not obviously mirror what's happening in the classroom, but it will allow for socialization,
Yeah.
enrichment activities. The amount of activities that you can do around nature are endless. So things that we wouldn't normally have done would get done in terms of science activities. So I think that that's really promising, and I'm looking forward. And for my own self, I happen to teach at a school that has a playground that is acres, like it's massive. So our whole school, if we had pavilion tents, could be outside at the same time.
All right. So all those San Francisco parks are coming in handy right now.
We're in discussions with the city on that. Yeah, Rec and Park.
Nice. All right. It sounds like it could be a pretty cool year for the kids. Not gonna lie, I'm a little bit jealous. I didn't get to spend my days outside. That's cool. All right. Sonia's wondering, is there a forum for school districts to share learnings and strategies that have worked? What does that look like? Is there a coalition?
Well, there's several kind of high level forums that are going on. So I can't really speak to what like the CTA, the California Teacher Association, is doing around those forums for teachers. But I do know our district is a member of the Council of the Great City Schools, which is the 70 largest urban districts in the country. And so on Fridays we have calls and we share what's happening in our districts. So it would be like Miami-Dade or Indianapolis or Houston or Phoenix, et cetera. And so we do share, on high level ideas and things that we think are working. But we really are in our nascent stages, and we really can't point to a lot of things that have been really successful in distance learning, although we can point to a lot of things that did not work. And so things that we do not want to try again. And we also know that, there are more guidelines, thankfully, from the state around, again, through SB 98, around attendance, around how many times schools have to check in with families for like wellness checks, et cetera. So there's more guidelines, which I think will be really helpful. We did a wellness check. We planned to do them in May and June for all of our families. We reached 2/3 of our families, and many, many, many of our families were so thankful that we were just calling to see how they were doing and if they needed something, if food, shelter assistance, and job searches. And we are going to be doing that same wellness check more robustly at least three times going into this next year. So that's a best practice that we want to continue to do.
All right. So Matthew, okay, your head's where my head's at. How are you thinking about effective educational pedagogy and technology? So the district is not spending a bunch of money on apps and all kinds of ed tech that's just clunky and horrible and not working. How do you figure out what's actually working and creating a positive impact on the students?
That's a really good question from Melissa Dodd, who's our guru around technology in our district, and Anikia Ford-Marthal, who's the head of our curriculum department, or she's the head of all of our curriculum and instruction and learning and teaching. But I just know what I know in terms of what I utilize in distance teaching, which was Zoom, Jamboard, a little bit of screencastifying, none of it which I had to pay for, and my students, got, like I said, still only 20-25% of what they would have gotten in the classroom with me. But that is a question that you're asking that I think we need to delve into. It might be something that when I was talking earlier about having a consortium of folks in tech who want to intersect with the district, on troubleshooting and coming up with ideas that we can try out in our distance teaching.
Well, we're here. I know certainly Google, Microsoft Teams, they, one of our board members, Microsoft, has a program where they bring their engineers and folks like that into the classroom. And so,
Yeah.
let's see what we can get going. Okay. So Mark, you have a lot of fans, I gotta say. Vanessa Perez from Cleveland says hi and that she misses you. This is like the most fanfare.
Vanessa and wow, that's amazing that two of my folks from Cleveland are in the audience. That's crazy.
Oh, that's so fun.
We had a great
Okay.
team.
Yeah, you guys were a close-knit bunch. And I mean, that sounds like something that, teachers kind of need other teachers. Like, you guys also need one another, right? Like that's the distancing for just that socialization and the staff support for one-on-one. That must be difficult too.
It really is. And, for the last 3 weeks, there's only 8 teachers at my school. It's a very small school. It's a public school, but it's only 135 kids, 8 teachers. And my phone is blowing up every day with ideas. Like everybody's connecting every day. Everybody's wants to outreach with each other. It's a very tight group of people, much like at Cleveland. So yeah, it's been hard doing that distance instead of, a lot of that stuff is done at the lunch table, in the staff room at lunch or after school or on the sidelines at the staff meetings, but with a lot of side talk, but you can't replace obviously the in-person reality that we all love and miss. Although some teachers I know are like so happy to go into just Zoom staff meetings in the future, even if we go back into the brick and mortar, they're like, can we still do Zoom?
Yeah, I think staff meetings are one that universally across every profession, perhaps not the most exciting part of the job. All right. Well, I think we have brought the hour to a close. Last question for you, Mark. Since you are an educator, please leave us with your favorite inspirational quote as we continue through uncharted territory.
Oh, don't do that to me.
Come on, you got to have them like all up over your classroom.
No, I don't. I honestly, I have to say this. I don't do that. In fact, nobody at my school does that for some reason. I think that we've moved away from inspirational quotes because they're I don't know if they are cliche or not, but they've never.
I dated myself.
They've never glommed on for me. So I don't have any. I'll say my only inspirational thing I'll say is that, I think we all realize that we are in this together, and that the more that we work together and problem solve together is why I bring up, and I know that you want to do this, to collaborate with the tech industry, for example. The more we realize that and don't play the blame game, point fingers, but allow our frustrations to actually meld into hope and into grace and compassion, and that we all realize that flexibility means that means just that things will change on the dime, and you have to be flexible to go with it, but that we are interdependent and depend on each other to move forward. And if we can do that together, we will survive this. Not only just survive this, we will thrive after this, and even within it, we can thrive. I've been really blessed to be not just a classroom teacher, but also to be on a school board that has this kind of collective ideal already, with a superintendent who shares that value. And so many of our folks in the field do as well. I just want us all to really come together, be together, and know that if we want to have a common enemy, it's the virus. And if you don't like our president, maybe the president, but that's where I would stand. That would be my hope and thought for everybody out there.
Perfect. Mark Sanchez, everybody, President of the Board of Education. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing what we can do together. Have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Let's email each other.
We will.
All right.
I will catch you soon.
Peace.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.